Never hand. That's DSM-5. Ready for action. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Oh, that was too respecting. Oh, okay. Always respect with two hands. Just kidding. All right, so back to the last segment. Hey, it worked. Okay, so here we are, right? We just finished the social disorder, right? You got those all pinned down? So let's look over these metaform disorders. They're changing dramatically in DSM-5. So we will visit them. We'll visit each category somewhat briefly. First, there is, I think, a really important concept. I don't care which helping profession you find yourself going to, or even science that you end up doing research in. This concept has a long, long history, perhaps all the way back to the Greeks. The notion of somaticizing our psychological problems. Back in the day, the idea of conversion hysteria was popular, and that ultimately morphed into the present conversion disorder. But there's another phrase on here that just sort of examining this slide may not reveal the full importance of this, and that is the notion of conversion reaction. That's a notion you're going to have to identify in a very specific way on the test. But think about it. It's really, again, no rocket science. You know what conversion is. If you convert from Catholicism to Lutheranism, you made a change in the way you believe. Conversion disorder is the conversion of psychological stress into physical symptoms. And indeed, you'll see the most dramatic example of that in the conversion disorders, which used to be called hysterical blindness, hysterical deafness. So in its worst form, this idea of conversion of psychic distress into a physical phenomenon, lacking in physical basis, lacking in having a pathophysiological foundation, is a very popular idea. It's been around a long time, and I think it's still a useful notion. Certainly you know, when you burn the candle at both ends, you end up sometimes becoming physically symptomatic. Whether that be a headache or diarrhea, it's your way, your highly idiosyncratic way of revealing that you've gone past your own abilities to tolerate lengthy periods of stressful circumstances. Sooner or later, all of us will break down physically if the psychological distress is intense enough and chronic enough. Fortunately, for most of us, that doesn't happen. But on any given day, we can overdo it and become physically symptomatic. And here's the important thing about this. Unlike psychological factors affecting medical condition where there is pathophysiology measured, in somatoform, body-like disorders, there is an absence of substantiation for the physical symptoms that are being manifest. Does this make sense to you? Real simple distinction. The old psychosomatic disorders that we visited briefly, and we visited them under the new rubric of psychological factors affecting medical condition where there is a medical condition established and psychological factors exacerbate that condition, or perhaps even an argument is made that psychological factors initiate the occurrence of that condition. That's psychosomatic disorder, now known as psychological factors affecting medical condition. This is a horse of a whole different color. It is physical symptoms in the absence of sufficient substantiation of an underlying medical problem. So there is no axis 3 diagnosis. Remember that stuff? Metaform disorder just sits out there looking like a physical problem all by itself, nothing to put on axis 3. You remember, psychological factors affecting medical condition, by definition, must include the medical disorder on axis 3 because there has to be a medical condition already diagnosed that is being exacerbated by the stress. By the way, you can freely substitute the psychological factors stress, because that's basically what we're talking about. Stress either exacerbates an existing medical condition or produces physical symptoms that might look like somatoform, might look like a physical condition, but in fact is not. Okay. That's the most important part of this slide. These are the somatoform disorders. We'll visit each one of them. And here's where the trick is, I think. A kind of a trick. Trick in that we don't have this all pinned down precisely as we would like to. We don't have these processes differentiated like they are differentiated in the medical arena in which real disease is differentiated. So we have this idea of a conversion disorder, which by its definition is a disorder, but I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that conversion reactions occur all the time. And they may not constitute a specific disorder in their own right. Now, I saw a young lady one time who came to me referred for biofeedback because of chronic, in this case, she would have been characterized as a headache patient, but her pain was actually in the trapezius area. Did I tell you about her earlier in the course? Where I hooked her up to this biofeedback equipment. It stopped me. I don't want to repeat what we have to cover today. It stopped me if I told you this portion of this case before. When I hooked her up to the equipment that monitors the amount of tension, in this case in the trapezius muscle, her headaches were of this variety. You know, you see some people who have a lot of head pain to the back of the head. Often, but not always, often it is connected to chronic, excessive muscle contraction, if you prefer, tension in the trapezius muscles. And those are those muscles that people massage when they come from behind you. They're huge muscles that go from the neck down across the shoulder. I put her on a biofeedback equipment. I've seen other patients with that profile before. And long story short, when you get them on there, you see about 4 or 6 microvolts of activity in muscles. It should reveal about 2 or less. So you see what you have to do. You have to train muscle relaxation that gets it down below that critical 2 microvolt threshold. This is nothing more than to say quantifying a level of relaxation that now competes with the dynamics of the disorder. If chronic, intense, excessive muscle tension creates pain, and it will, it's well documented in the medical arena, then indeed employing deep muscle relaxation is easy to conceive as a reasonable way of breaking into the dynamics of the pain problem, disrupting the pain problem. Okay? So now, when I got her on this equipment, she was at around 12 microvolts. Yet, asking her about whether or not she had a lot of tension in these muscles, no. She had a lot of pain in the back of her head. So, clearly, I had a lot of work to do. I did tell you this story already? I had a lot of work to do. I had to get her from 12 chronic, resting, basal, walking out the door levels of muscle tension to below 2 in the office, and then ultimately to carry that level out of the office. It takes a lot of training, and that's what biofeedback is very helpful. Yeah. You set criterion at 11 microvolts, and we tell the patient, when you get below 11 microvolts, this green light's going to come on. Keep the green light on as long as you can. Once they do that, you change threshold down to 10 microvolts. Now the green light goes off unless the criterion is 10 microvolts. You're following this? Really simple. It's called shaping. It's an operating strategy. Until we ultimately get her down to 2 microvolts. We get her to sort of sense how different that is from the level of tension that she experiences normally before she came in for treatment. Well, no matter how close to that 12 microvolt level I got with my criterion, trying to get her to just change that much, I could not get this woman. And it's usually very easy, it's very quick, very swift, very effective. I could not get her below 11 microvolts, 11 to 12 microvolts consistently. Which was to say, she's going to stay symptomatic as long as she carries that much tension around. The other part of what goes on, biofeedback is not done in isolation. It's embedded in psychotherapy. So the other thing that was going on was an exploration of circumstances under which this problem developed. And of course, looking for what were the etiological factors and should they be incorporated into the treatment plan in a comprehensive way, in as much as often the amount of tension that's being carried around might not be the only thing going on in the person's life. I.e., that may have been a converted psychological distress stemming from an area of the person's life that was not going well, or that was carrying with it excess emotional baggage. And the end of this long story short, I can never give a long story go short. But anyhow, the end of the story is, she revealed to me that the problem actually developed. I didn't get this in the intake part of my relationship with her. It was saved for later, and you'll probably understand why when you hear it. She said, actually, this thing really got bad following the time when she began an affair with a man, obviously without her husband's knowledge. She was an evangelical Christian. And at that point, I thought, aha, now we've really got a delicate matter going on here. Here is a woman in a relationship, that in a marital relationship. By the way, at the time that I saw her, that extramarital affair had been terminated. She still carried with her, finish the sentence, guilt. It's a very difficult emotional process that can often be the bridge to the conversion reaction. Now, do you see conversion reaction here? This is something she could not shape. And that's a real dilemma for me now, because now I've got to work on her guilt over an extramarital affair. Well, it was really worse than that, because when I asked her about what was going on in these muscles, I said, I've never seen anything like this. And anyone I used to see a lot of headache patients, and I never saw anything like that. She said, this is the cross Christ gave me to bear. Whoa. At least whoa for me. It was at that point obviously. If Christ gave her that cross to bear, who the hell is Ernst to remove it? Well, I certainly was not the right person because I don't pass for a minister or a priest. And in fact, as I probably told you before, I'm not interested in getting people to heaven. I'm interested in getting people to be happier while they're on earth. So sometimes that comes in conflict with what the person is dealing with. I mean, I could have easily started a long psychotherapy all over the issue of what could happen. Shit happens. You made a mistake. When are you going to put it in the rearview mirror and forgive yourself? But this particular person was a very evangelical, there's degrees of evangelicalism, and I just felt the issue was too delicate. So I referred her to a treatment center, a mental health center called Agape, the Agape Center. I didn't know what that word meant, but I know the guy in it was a Christian-based counselor, and I just thought it would be more appropriate for him to deal with those issues than for me, just on the sense of credibility. He was a far more credible mediator of her guilt, much as a priest is a far more credible mediator of relief of guilt by virtue of confession and penance and so forth. Well, obviously, she was not Catholic, so I couldn't go. I would have gone, if she was Catholic, I would have gone there. I would have been the priest for her. I'd be happy to do that. Because I think I know the dynamics of how that all works for Catholics. But for an evangelical Christian, I don't remember, I think it was Assembly of God. Does that sound evangelical? Something like that. Anyhow, that was outside of my area of expertise, if you will, and I referred her on. Textbook example of conversion reaction. And indeed, she was not going to let go of that pain, her punishment, if you will, her penance, put it that way. You don't have to be Catholic to do penance, right? So her penance was not going to go away until she felt she had perpetrated, if you will, sufficient punishment on her for this horrific thing that she did. And all I did was to address with her, this happens. It happens very frequently. You are not an anomaly in society. It happens. Many, in fact, most marriages survive. And yours will. And that's about as far as I got. That's the point at which I referred to her. All right, so that's a somatoform disorder. Well, I would have probably diagnosed in this system as somatoform disorder not otherwise specified. Or I could have chosen psychological factors affecting medical condition because muscle contraction headache is a legitimate medical diagnosis. And we do know the dynamics, the underlying dynamics of it relative to excessive muscle contraction, just like many low back pain, many chronic pain problems are. And by the way, I also considered her as a pain disorder, another somatic form disorder. So there were a lot of ways to capture in the diagnostic system. The most important thing, of course, was to identify the etiological factors and the factors maintaining the problem, and then making sure she was getting the proper comprehensive intervention for it. All right, so let's go through these other disorders. They're pretty straightforward. Hypochondriasis, probably everybody in this room knows hypochondriac, right? I mean, you don't have to be a diagnostician to figure this one out. But there are some nuances to it, and this is undergoing significant change, by the way, that we can't visit in DSM-5. But there are some important things to think about. First of all, it's got to be a life-threatening illness. And the person has to be preoccupied with it. And, you can be preoccupied with a life-threatening illness for a while. It's when you exceed that critical criterion that you'll see in other disorders of 6 months. Often, and I don't know if DSM-5 is going to change this, often we say, let's just see what's going on here, and we'll see. When it passes the 6-month test, then we'll apply the official diagnosis. So, preoccupation with a life-threatening illness, usually based on misinterpretations of normal bodily sensations. Palpitations are a common one, which the person thinks, oh my God, I have heart disease, and now I'm going to die, I better go to the doctor. And the doctor does an EKG, even a treadmill EKG, and everything looks fine. the doctor tells the patient, you're probably having a few PVCs, premature ventricular contractions, and they cause a little stuff like that now and then. But the doctor will tell you, as he would tell everybody in this room, every one of you has PVCs in the 25,000 times the heartbeats a day? I did math on this one once. Figured out it's 70 beats per minute. It's a lot of beats. The heart's not perfect, okay? So it hiccups now and then in all of you. Some of you, most of you, almost all of you don't even know it. However, there is a PVC phenomenon that occurs in people with heart disease, and indeed, when those PVCs occur in people with heart disease, you can be dead like that. You can be alive 1 minute and DOA the next. All right? So, if somebody knows that, and they feel these palpitations, and there are other psychological dynamics that fuel this level of thinking, or this kind of thinking, indeed, they can become hypochondriacal, insisting they have a disease that is going to take their life in the presence of reassurance from an authority that they do not. So the doctor tells the patient, you're clean bill of health. And the patient goes, oh, thank goodness. Thank you so much, doctor. I just needed to hear that from a real doctor, and now I can go on and live the rest of my life without work. And she now leaves the doctor's office and walks to her car in the parking lot. As she's getting to the car, she's thinking, what if we miss anything? By the time she gets home, she's all worked up again, thinking, it's a mistake. Something wrong with the EKG. Maybe he had the wrong EKG. Maybe he had somebody else's EKG, etc. This is the kind of thinking that goes on in the mind of the hypochondriacal patient. Sooner or later, they work themselves back into a state of excessive worry, hence the term preoccupation with a life-threatening illness that is present. They are convinced it's present, and this is how this is different from illness phobia. In illness phobia, someone is convinced they're going to have a disorder, that it's going to occur one day or someday soon. That's illness phobia. The hypochondriacal patient, the patient diagnosed with hypochondriasis, is someone who is already convinced. Disease conviction is another word or phrase that you'll see in here. Preoccupation, resistance to medical disease, medical reassurance. And here are some of the epidemiological characteristics of the disorder. Again, I'm in the third bullet here, I'm differentiating, as you will next Monday, differentiating it from illness phobia. Won't you? Pretty simple. And it does have some relationships with other things. These are interesting people. I saw a lot of these folks in my practice days, and they really are very interesting. You had better know something about the disease about which they think they are convinced they have. Because if you don't have the answers, then indeed you are not going to dispel their anxieties about whether or not they have them. I always tell that back in the day before I came here training doctors, make sure you've read the latest article on PVCs or this, that, and the other, because they will test. They will pick up articles from medical journals before the medical people do. So they will put you to the test, the really good ones. I mean, the really smart ones, and many of them are very smart. Okay, you can ignore some of this in previous texts. I don't know, maybe yours has Polo and Nahat in it as well. There are cross-cultural versions of hypochondriasis. They're always embedded in a discussion of hypochondriasis when, in fact, I do not think to the extent that either of these conditions is associated with a life-threatening illness, I don't know why textbook authors continue to put them in there. That's why I have my question marks out there. I won't test you on that. It's there because they are interesting phenomena cross-culturally, but not very
not very useful from the standpoint of exemplifying what's true about hypochondriasis. Okay, so it used to be regarded as more common in the elderly, but this is proven to be false. Needless to say, the older you get, the more physical, the more your body starts barking back at you, and it makes you alarmed about what might be going on, because obviously this is the process of life and death. So clearly you should expect this more in old people, but in fact, old people as a population do really not appear to be any more vulnerable than young people. So this would suggest that indeed it is a neurotic phenomenon in every sense of the term. Differentiate between this and malingering or factitious disorder when someone is looking for something. The malingering and the factitious disorder, we've talked about this before. You will remember on Monday, factitious disorder for the attention of the doctor, no other reason, or indeed for the attention of the family. If indeed the hypochondriacal fixations, as we sometimes call them, are the only way grandmom can get your attention and for you to give her meaningful time from you about your caring about her and still caring about her in an advanced age. I'm probably using that as a bad example when I tell you it's not more frequent in the elderly. But if that's what's going on, it's really factitious. It has a factitious component at the very least. This is the only way she can get the family's attention, then indeed, and the compassion of the family as it sustains that fixation now has factitious characteristics. Obviously, this is more likely to happen in the clinic, more likely to be diagnosed in the clinic because the doctor will recognize that it is the relationship with the doctor and the doctor's expression of caring, and in a sense, caring being a component of love. To that extent, this becomes a factitiously motivated phenomenon. The patient may indeed not be aware at all that what they're really looking for is love and compassion and caring. They'd be totally disconnected from it. All they know is they feel terrible, and when they see the doctor, they feel better. And they're going to continue to see the doctor. So perhaps then when they feel terrible, their feeling terrible is the absence of perception of being loved. Okay. There is some recent evidence to suggest that hypochondriasis can be more effectively treated when a doctor, or I'm not talking about a real doctor now, MD doctor, medical doctor, when a doctor actually spends enough time with the patient to go over the details. You know, the average amount of time that you spend with your doctor these days, you being any the American population, entire American population, the average amount of time with your doctor is 7 minutes. Not a lot of time. And of course, as some people point out now, David Healy amongst them, half of those 7 minutes, the doctor is now peering into a computer screen looking at your numbers, right? And that's what treatment has turned into. The old form of primary care was one in which the doctor intervened until he was satisfied, or she was satisfied that she got to the root of the problem and created a comprehensive treatment program based on what the patient is saying and revealing in her or his distress. This is not the doctor's fault. This is the system's fault. Doctors are going to get paid the same for that visit, whether it's 7 minutes or 70 minutes, pretty much. So they are forced to operate quickly because of a broken medical system, at least in that respect. Somatization disorder, quickly, an awfully disabling disorder, creating significant dysfunction. Used to be called Burkitt syndrome, and now has been changed to somatization disorder. This may morph again in DSM-5. One of the significant criteria that you'll identify on Monday, am I giving away too much of the story here? You'll be making on Monday is that in somatization disorder there is a requirement that the diagnosis is made before the age of 30. Why is that? Because you start somaticizing more after age 30. So one of the good news is if you don't have schizophrenia by age 30, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to have it. So celebrate that on your 30th birthday. But you can also celebrate the beginning of your body beginning to give you a lot of sensations that you don't like, not the least of which is pain. So somatization disorder is one in which there are multiple physical symptoms across multiple physiological systems unaccounted for by medical substantiation. And you can see they've even broken them down. Originally, you had to have 13, showing either 12 for males back in the day, until who got a hold of that one? Feminists. So why did they give one extra symptom for females before they would make this diagnosis? Males, last I checked, do not menstruate. Therefore, menstrual associated physical symptoms have to be included, or were thought to be necessary to include above and beyond, so that it would be a little more difficult to diagnose in women. All right, so now they changed it all and made it easier for both. It's now eight symptoms, and this is a relatively rare disorder. But when you see it, I saw two of them. Man, they are dysfunctional. In fact, I thought one of them, by the way, one of the guys that I saw with somatization disorder is a doctor. Brilliant doctor. Scored on a 96 percentile in the board. Brilliant. He's in the wrong profession. You can see why he's pursued. He was bright, very intelligent. Pursued medicine because he already had, very early on, the developing somatization disorder, which he was symptomatic in every conceivable physiological system in his body. He never found his answers and went on to, in fact, leave the medical profession later in his career. I followed him after that. Okay, so I think you get the picture here. There's nothing worth emphasizing in that. And then let's move on. So you get the idea. Somatization disorder, huge number of symptoms, diagnosed before the age of 30, highly dysfunctional when encountered. And usually, obviously, they're seen in the medical circles. They're seen not necessarily, they may end up in a psychiatric facility, but they're seen for a while in the medical setting, traditional medical setting. Conversion disorder, absolutely love these disorders. I all but prayed for one to show up at my doorstep in my private practice days because they are so interesting, but I never saw one. A conversion reaction, I just described to you, a very interesting patient. These patients tend to be very interesting. But in conversion disorder, there is a major impact on sensory or motor function, such that the person becomes almost incapacitated. And indeed, along with it, there's this historically interesting notion that is kind of dying away. We call labelle indifference. When people become somatically symptomatic, especially in a profound way. How would you feel if you woke up this morning and you couldn't see? Would that scare you just a little bit? If you were completely blind, I would be in a state of panic. And I would be in an ambulance just as fast as you can say ambulance. As fast as my wife could say 911. Point being, there is an interesting indifference that you see in conversion disorder, or so the people say who treat them, that suggests these symptoms are functional. Do you see how the conversion reaction patient that I just described to you had functional symptoms? How did they function? They functioned to alleviate her grief so that she could operate relatively normally on a day-to-day basis. In conversion disorder, you have the absolute most dramatic example of that. Either the person wakes up blind, deaf, or paralyzed in its most extreme form. Very rare these days. Very rare. In Freud's days, as you'll see here, and I think it's articulated in the book, it's actually pretty common. And I would say to your generation, indeed, in my generation, far more common than in yours, but in Freud's day it was even worse. And in a word, guilt. Guilt, and I would add to that, uninformed with regard to the normalcy of sexuality. Keep in mind, back in Freud's day, masturbation was a mental illness. Imagine that. So what does that tell you? That tells you there was a very uptight society who was not willing to come to grips with the normalcy of sexuality. And indeed, many of these conversion disorders were precipitated by sexual transgressions, at least transgressions with respect to what it is that they had been taught was right or wrong. So why do I say your generation is better off? Because your level of knowledge about the breadth and complexity and variability and variety of sexuality far exceeds my generation, and even more so in Freud's generation. Although Freud practiced it after 1950 when he died. Now, you don't believe that? Watch that TV channel that has all these old programs that I watched when I was a kid, like I Love Lucy. Anybody see this program? Lucy was married. And in fact, the actor that she was married to was her husband in real life. But they could not be shown to be sleeping in the same bed. That might suggest what? They might be having sex. When she got pregnant during the show, they only filmed her from the shoulders up often, until it was pointed out. That long story I won't give you, but the point being, can you imagine, compare that to today? The two people weren't sleeping. My God, I see 6 people in one bed in prime time TV now. It is a dramatic evolution of our sense of what is acceptable in terms of sexuality. So I'm suggesting to you that indeed, guilt, especially around sexuality, was a very powerful ideological factor in the conversion disorders, accounting for their frequency. In Freud's days, Freud had a field day with these subjects. They were fascinating and very treatable. Because as soon as you dig into the underlying circumstances supporting the symptoms resolve. And most of them will resolve on their own anyhow. Because indeed they do not have a physiological basis to support. So even in the absence of treatment, these people will ultimately end up okay. There's the term I mentioned. Not as popular today. I would say those of you go, how many people going into rehab? Great. I mean, you're going to see a lot of pain problems, and likely anyhow in your rehab work. Same with medical people, nursing, etc. Always, when a person is describing their pain and giving you the full picture of how it presents itself, pay very careful attention to the emotions they display as they are describing their difficulties. You might even see a person describing their situation while smiling. That is an incongruent emotion for someone who is in pain. But it does suggest to you, and it will suggest to you, that the emotion you're seeing displayed is a hint that there may be factitious or other related functional aspects of the symptom that are working well for the patient. They are conversions of psychological distress, and that this makes it easier to deal with for the patient for whatever reason. That's labella indifference at its root, so to speak. Here we are. You've heard that we've done this about as much as we can, the factitious disorder. And someone asked, I remember a while back when we first brought this up, what is this like Munchausen syndrome? And it is. It's the old Munchausen syndrome. What has gotten the most press, of course, is Munchausen by proxy, in which parents, usually a mom, is actually in some cases poisoning the child at toxic levels that don't kill but create symptomatology in the child, so that the medical professions rush to the attention of the child, and the mother in this case feels some sense of gratification, i.e. factitious benefit from the attention being received vicariously through the child, hence by proxy. Most of us, including yours truly, would prefer that this diagnosis not be made, because I believe, as many other mental health professionals do, that this is not a disorder, this is child abuse. And when we distract it from what it is, pure and simple, I feel for the victims of this by proxy condition. And when we make it a condition, it becomes defendable. It becomes a forensic issue, and I think it need not be. As many others do. I'm not alone in that. Malingering, remember, is different from factitious disorder because the patient is very conscious about producing the symptoms, and in so producing those symptoms, there is a payoff. You're seeing it. Is that lady still in court? What's her name? She's still in there defending her, stabbing her boyfriend 30 times, or maybe it was her husband 30 times, and shooting him or whatever. And she can't remember the most significant pieces of it. We talked about this for a minute, didn't we? Malingering. Because what's the payoff? You can get the jury to believe that, and they believe then that somehow pulls the guilt and the responsibility off of her. And if it works, then by definition, indeed, it is malingering. If indeed she knows what she's doing, my suspicion is that she does know what she's doing. And you see people in a malingering state often who have these sort of character disorders to begin with, kind of people who could, in fact, find the wherewithal to stab somebody 30 times. Is also seen in someone with other character issues who will, of course, not be at all disturbed by the need to malinger. Pain disorder is simply a disorder that is somatoform because the pain exceeds what has been substantiated by medical diagnosis, or the pain may be there in the absence of any pathophysiology, as the doctors call it, in the absence of any medical substantiation at all. Okay, so very simple. If the pain has psychogenic origin, exceeds what is expected from any pathological findings by the doctor, then indeed pain disorder is diagnosed. Last but not least, we'll wind down with this. By the way, the material on the personality disorders, I'll only include a few questions from the textbook chapter. So your test on Monday is going to be anxiety disorders and the chapter that includes two groups of disorders: dissociative, somatoform disorders. Anything on personality disorders will be straight out of the textbook. Yes, sir. Pardon? Yes, that's because that's part of the anxiety disorders, at least the DSM-14R. Yes. The PTSD is asking about acute stress. Okay, body dysmorphic disorder, somatoform, I think it's a bad fit. This is a disorder that somebody stuck in the somatoform group because they didn't have any other place to put it. These are the diagnostic features: preoccupation with imagined defect in appearance, my nose is too big, face is not, my cheeks aren't fat enough, my whatever people do now for plastic surgery to make themselves look more like models and whatnot. Not the least of which is breast augmentation as well. especially when you see this occurring in 15-year-olds. This could form the basis of body dysmorphic disorder. And here one would say, I guess, when you see this, it is that, that person's nose, from a size standpoint, may be on the far end of the large, on the normal curve. But their obsession with the idea that it needs to be smaller is what becomes the basis of the psychopathology. Now, these people do have some serious difficulties, by the way. I mean, this is distressing. If they are not dysfunctional, they certainly have enough distress to be characterized as a legit mental disorder, just on the blah, blah, blah criterion alone. Okay, plastic surgery is booming physically. I don't know what they would do without body dysmorphic disorders, although in the defense of plastic surgeons, many of them now do complete psychological evaluations of their patients before they perform appearance-changing surgery. Yes? Yeah. He's asking, can we blame the culture in terms of body image and so forth? If we talk about the eating disorder, we haven't gotten to the eating disorders yet, right? Let's revisit that when we get to the eating disorder. Okay, well, when do we get to the eating disorder? It's even worse there. Yeah, we can't. Well, it's complicated. We can blame us for buying into this ideal look that's being promoted by the fashion industry primarily. Yeah. Okay. I'll see you next Wednesday, right? Have a great Easter, and don't forget to test on Monday online. You know the drill. Don't be late. It's not here. It's on your computer.